Hi and welcome. To start with, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the few of the key components that together make up the bass guitar. Today, I'm going to be showing you around using my 5-string bass. Every bass guitar is slightly different as companies use different materials and design ideas to create new instruments. But fundamentally, each design has to do the same job, and it's their own take on a tried and tested philosophy. For example, you might have heard of or own a fretless or a headless bass. There are also extended range basses, which include your 5, 6 and multi-stringed instruments. However, regardless of the configuration or type of the bass that you might be using, you'll find that your instrument, as my instrument, as everyone else's instrument, is made up of exactly the same key components. If you're an absolute beginner and just picking up the instrument for the first time, then this lesson is a perfect opportunity for you to get acquainted with what will hopefully become a lifelong friend. Okay, I'm going to start at one end of my instrument and work my way down to the other, giving you a brief overview of what each part does and why it's there. I'm going to start with what we call the headstock. Now, obviously, if you have a headless bass, the clue's in the title there, and you won't have one of these. But the majority of bass guitars have one, and its sole purpose is to mount the tuners. Each string on the bass has its own tuning peg, whose primary function is to allow us to change the tension of the string that runs to it, and therefore changing the pitch of that string. More tension in the string results in a higher pitched note, and vice versa. Moving down from the headstock and the tuners, we see the strings running over a little piece of material here. This is what we call the nut. Now, the nut can be made from a variety of materials, including bone, graphite or brass, and its job is to space the strings evenly at the end of the fingerboard on their way to the tuning pegs. Now we come to the neck of the bass. This runs from the headstock right up to the body, and glued on top of the neck is something we call the fingerboard. Fingerboards generally need to be hard wearing and tend to be made from harder woods such as maple, rosewood and ebony, although nowadays it's not uncommon to find composite materials being used. You can see on this instrument that the fingerboard is divided by a number of metal strips. These are called frets. Frets divide the length of the fingerboard into half-step or semitone intervals and allow us to change the pitch of the string depending on where we choose to fret the note. If you move up by 1 fret, you've gone up in pitch by 1 semitone. Pressing down on a fret has the effect of changing the length of a string. The shorter the string is, the higher the pitch. And it's typical that most basses have between 21 and 24 frets. Staying with the neck for a second, I'm just going to mention about a very important component of the bass guitar. It's called the truss rod, and it's an adjustable metal bar that runs down the entire length of the neck, just under the fingerboard. Its main function is to keep the bass intact. If we didn't have a truss rod and just made our neck out of wood and strung the strings up, the bass would collapse. Quite simply, it would fold in two, as the wood alone is not strong enough to cope with the forces put onto the neck by tuning the strings up to tension. The truss rod is there to counteract this force and hold the neck straight. It pulls the neck in this direction whilst the strings pull on the neck the other way. Looking at the body of the bass, we can see that it makes up a significant portion of the instrument. As well as changing the sound of the bass by constructing the body out of different woods, it serves as a platform on which to mount the other key components of the instrument. These are the pickups, the bridge, and any onboard electronics. Taking the pickups first, these are located anywhere in the area between the bridge and the end of the fingerboard. Some basses have 1 pickup, others might have 2, and for those of you that have heard of or seen Bootsy Collins, his bass uses 5. A pickup is basically a big magnet that detects or picks up the vibration of a string and converts this vibration into a voltage. It's this very low-level signal that we amplify, and this gives us the sound of the bass guitar. Pickups come in different shapes and sizes, and each design sounds slightly different. Certain bass manufacturers are renowned for using particular pickups in their basses. For example, you might have heard of single coil or jazz bass pickups. Humbucker pickups are the type that I've got in this bass, or some Fender basses use what's called a split coil pickup. Let's move on to the bridge. Bass guitar bridges vary from simple bent pieces of metal to much more elaborate designs, but regardless of looks, their function remains the same. Its purpose is to anchor the string securely at one end so that it can be tensioned and tuned to pitch by the tuning pegs on the headstock. The bridge also helps to transfer vibrations from the strings through to the body of the bass, and this in turn helps a note to sustain and gives the instrument a greater depth of tone. You may have heard people talking about something called scale length. The scale length of a bass guitar is quite simply the distance between the bridge and the nut, and in most cases it's typically around 33 to 35 inches in length. The bridge unit also allows you to make adjustments to the action, which is basically the height of the strings from the fingerboard, and also something called the intonation. Intonation involves lengthening or shortening a string by a very small amount to ensure that it plays perfectly in tune, whether you fret it on the first or the last fret. Lastly, let's have a look at the onboard electronics. As with the pickups, the number of knobs and switches can vary greatly from one bass to another. Typically, you would have a master volume and a pan control. The pan control allows you to blend between the outputs of either the front or back pickups, giving you the ability to greatly change the tone of the instrument. As the instrument I'm using is what we call an active bass, I also have the ability to change the tone in a bigger way by using an onboard EQ. Further to pan and volume, I can on this instrument independently change the bass, middle and treble settings to sculpt a sound to suit most musical styles. The basic difference between an active bass and a passive bass is that an onboard battery powers the electronics inside of an active bass. Now, there's been much debate as to which is supposed to be better, but I believe that if you're happy with the sound of your bass, then that's what's important. If, like me, you've got a lot of different knobs and switches, take the time now to get used to what each one does. Try and listen to how turning each knob affects the tone and the sound of the instrument, and getting more familiar with your bass and how it works can, in my opinion, only be seen as a very good thing to do. I certainly hope that this overview of the bass guitar has been informative and that you've managed to take away something useful from it. Don't panic though if you fully haven't understood some of the terminology used at the moment. It's early days, and I'll be explaining some of these details in greater depth as we continue through these lessons together. I'll see you next time.